Episode 1, The Whisper Inside the Booth. I arrived at St. Adeline on a gray afternoon, the kind of light that makes old stones look older, as if time itself refused to move forward. The church had been closed for nearly 20 years, shuttered after the death of Father Laurent, the last man to serve here. They said he died inside the confessional, whispering prayers no one could hear. The bishop sent me to reopen the parish. A place of faith needs a voice again, he told me. But even as I unlocked the heavy wooden doors, I felt the air thicken, like something had been waiting behind them, holding its breath. Dust floated in the pews like pale incense. The smell of damp and candle wax clung to every surface. Yet my eyes were drawn irresistibly to the old confessional at the far end, half hidden in shadow, its curtain barely hanging, its frame carved with Latin words that time had almost erased. Confessio Eternitatis. The confession of eternity. I brushed the wood with my fingers. It was warm, almost pulsing. That evening after prayers I sat inside for the first time, just to see what it felt like, to breathe where so many had sought forgiveness. I closed the sliding screen, whispered a small prayer and waited. Silence. Then I heard it. A whisper, soft, just behind the wooden lattice. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I froze. I hadn't opened the other door. No one could have entered without me noticing. My voice trembled as I answered, Go on, my child. The whisper grew clearer. I took a life. My stomach turned. I felt the breath through the screen, hot and human. Whose life? I asked. The voice paused. Then it said almost gently, Yours. The booth went still. My candle flickered, then died, smothered by air that suddenly tasted of ash. I opened the door, heart hammering. The church was empty. But the other side of the confessional, the penitent's door, was locked from the inside. I pushed harder. It wouldn't move. Finally, with one desperate shove, it burst open. No one was there. Only the faint smell of burnt incense, and a single crimson handprint smeared across the wall, still wet. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that whisper replaying in my head. I took a life. Yours. In the morning, sunlight cut through the stained glass and painted my hands red. I returned to the booth. The handprint was gone. But on the inside of the priest's door, etched deep into the wood, were 4 words I swear hadn't been there before. Your sins are known. And from somewhere within the booth, soft, almost tender, came the sound of breathing. I should have closed the church again that day. But I didn't. I thought I could cleanse it. I thought I could save it. I was wrong. Because St. Adeline's didn't need a priest. It needed a witness. And I had already confessed. Episode 2, The Woman Who Never Left. The next morning the church bells rang on their own. No wind, no hands on the rope. Just that hollow ancient sound rolling through the empty nave, announcing a service no one had called for. When I stepped outside, a woman was already waiting at the door. She was thin, her veil black as mourning, her face pale like something pressed between pages too long. Her eyes, gray, trembling, carried the weight of a prayer that refused to die. Are you the new priest? She asked. I nodded. I need confession. She walked past me, her shoes echoing on the stone floor, stopping directly before the confessional. I hadn't told anyone it was open again. I hadn't even planned to use it. Yet she moved toward it as if it had called her by name. Inside the booth, her voice was low, almost melodic. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I wished for my husband's death. The air between us turned heavy. I heard her breath tremble, the curtain quiver as she spoke. He drinks. He beats me. Every night, I pray he won't wake up the next morning. I tried to speak, to offer comfort, absolution, something, but the booth felt different this time. The wood under my hands vibrated faintly like a pulse. My child, I began, vengeful thoughts do not make you wicked. But you must. She interrupted. I didn't finish, Father. Her tone changed. Flat. Cold. I stopped praying for his death. Pause. Because last night he stopped breathing. The whisper slithered through the lattice, colder than the wind outside. I opened my mouth but words wouldn't come. Then I heard it, faint like water dripping in a tomb, a second voice from her side of the booth. A man's voice, hoarse, gasping. Let me out. I tore open my door, rushed around to the other side, but when I flung open the penitent's door she was gone. Only her veil remained on the seat, still warm. That night the police came to the rectory. They said a man had been found dead, strangled, inside his house on Elm Street. His wife, Margaret Goss, had been missing since dawn. They asked if I'd seen her. I said no. But the confessional knew otherwise. Because when I went back into the church, I saw something that made my blood turn to glass. Inside the booth, beneath the lattice, a shape shimmered faintly, the outline of a woman's face, carved into the wood like a brand. And when I leaned closer, her lips seemed to move. "Thank you, Father," she whispered. "He's quiet now." I staggered back, breathless, as the bells began to toll again, 12 times exactly. 12 sins. 12 prayers answered. And I realized something terrible. The confessional did not forgive. It fulfilled. Episode 3, The Boy Who Drew Angels. It was a Sunday morning when I first saw him. A boy no older than 10, sitting alone in the third pew, legs swinging, sketching quietly in a tattered notebook while the rest of the town prayed. His mother, a frail woman with hollow cheeks, kept glancing at him with that particular mix of pride and fear. After the service, he stayed behind while others left. I watched him kneel before the confessional, not to enter, just to look. He tilted his head as though listening to something no one else could hear. "What's your name, son?" I asked. He didn't turn around. "Gabriel," he said softly. "Like the angel." I smiled, though uneasily. "Do you like to draw, Gabriel?" He nodded and handed me a page. At first I thought it was a depiction of angels, wings spread, eyes bright. But as I looked closer, the figures were wrong. Their wings were made of hands, dozens of them reaching out from the body. Their faces had no mouths, only hollow circles where sound should have been. "They come when people whisper," the boy said. My throat tightened. "Who told you that?" He pointed toward the confessional. "They do." I followed his gaze. The booth stood silent, drenched in the amber light of the setting sun, its curtains stirring without wind. That evening, after locking the church, I returned to my study. The boy's drawing sat on my desk. Something about it disturbed me deeply. I told myself I'd burn it in the morning, but I never got the chance. At midnight, the church bells rang again, 3 short tolls, then silence. I rushed to the nave. The confessional curtain was swaying. On the floor lay Gabriel's notebook, open to a new page. It wasn't drawn in pencil this time. It was written in something darker, thick, red, still glistening. The page showed me, sitting inside the confessional. And behind me, a shadow with wings made of hands, whispering into my ear. I turned toward the booth, heart pounding. "Who's there?" I shouted. The curtain parted. Gabriel was inside. His small hands were stained red, clutching his sketchbook to his chest. His eyes were wide but calm, too calm. "They said they wanted a new friend," he whispered. "They said you'd understand." Before I could move, the candles flared violently and then went out. The church plunged into blackness and I felt something brush the back of my neck, cold, feathered, breathing. When the lights returned, the boy was gone. Only one thing remained, a single feather, gray as ash, resting on the bench. The next day his mother came to me weeping. Gabriel had vanished during the night. His room was empty, except for drawings pinned to the walls. All of them showed the same thing. The confessional. And the priest inside it, smiling. That was the first night I stopped praying aloud. Because I realized the whispers didn't need words anymore. Episode 4, The Blood Beneath the Cross. By the 4th week, the air inside St. Adeline's no longer smelled of incense. It smelled of rust and something older, like rain soaked into iron. Every night, the church grew colder, though the candles still burned. And every night, the confessional whispered louder. It began with a sound. A slow, steady drip from somewhere near the altar. At first, I thought it was water leaking through the roof, but the sky had been dry for days. The sound came from beneath the floorboards, rhythmic as a heartbeat. When I knelt and touched the stone tiles, they were warm, unnaturally so. That morning, the carpenter I had hired, a man named Harris, arrived to inspect the wooden foundations under the cross. He was a rough man with hands like rope and a tongue that loved to blaspheme. "You priests always think your ghosts live in the attic," he laughed. "They live under your feet." By noon, he had pried open a section of the flooring near the confessional. What we saw made him stop joking. The wood was dark, not from rot but from blood. Thick layers of it soaked deep into the planks. "Animal blood?" I asked. He scraped at it with his knife, then looked up, his face pale. "No, Father. This is human." We uncovered more, bones, fragments of cloth, and what looked like rosary beads fused to the timber. Harris wanted to leave. I told him to stop, that we had to keep digging, but he dropped his tools and stormed out, muttering that no church should bleed. When I was alone, I knelt over the hole. Beneath the crossbeam was a small metal plaque, tarnished almost beyond recognition. I wiped away the grime and read the inscription. "Forgive me, for I am already damned." The same words carved into the confessional door. As I stared, the floor around me began to stain darker, fresh liquid seeping upward through the cracks. I touched it. Still warm. Still moving. The church bells began to toll, though no one was there to ring them. Each chime grew louder until the whole building shuddered. When I finally looked up, the crucifix above the altar was crying, thick, dark streaks running from the eyes of Christ, dripping down onto the stone below. I stumbled backward, whispering prayers that broke halfway through my breath. Then, behind me from the open confessional, a voice spoke softly. "You shouldn't have looked beneath," it said. I turned, but there was no one inside, only the faint outline of footprints in the spreading pool of blood, leading away from the booth, and stopping exactly where I stood. The next morning, Harris was found dead by the river. His hands were raw, his fingernails filled with splinters, as if he tried to dig something out of the ground. I told no one what we had found. But that night, the whisper came again, this time from beneath my bed. "You opened the floor, Father. Now let us out." Episode 5, The Mirror Confession. It started with a reflection. Not in glass, in faith. I had always avoided looking too long into mirrors after the things I'd seen at St. Adeline's. But that morning, when I passed the narrow corridor beside the vestry, I noticed the small decorative mirror that had hung there for decades. It was cracked through the center, the fracture cutting Christ's reflected face cleanly in two. Someone had written a message across the glass in ash. "Who forgives the forgiver?" I wiped it away with my sleeve, but the words remained faintly visible, carved from the inside of the mirror itself. That afternoon, a man came to confession. He looked familiar, though I couldn't place him. His eyes were tired, his skin pale, like he hadn't slept in weeks. He entered the booth without speaking. For a long while the air between us was silent, heavy. Then he whispered, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." His voice was soft. Too soft. Sounded like mine. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Tell me your sin, my child." "I've lied," he said. "To God. To the church. To myself." I swallowed hard. "Confession frees the soul," I replied, forcing my tone steady. "Speak truth and you may be absolved." He exhaled slowly, his breath brushing through the lattice. "I told them I could save this place." I froze. The booth creaked. Then he said it, the words that turned my blood to ice. "I am Father Elias Moreau. And I can't stop the whispers." The light in the booth dimmed. My candle flickered out. In its place, a faint glow began to bloom from the wall, from the mirror mounted opposite the confessional. I stood up, trembling, and pushed open the door. The man was gone. But in the mirror, I saw him still sitting inside, me, head bowed, hands clasped in prayer. I stepped closer. The reflection followed perfectly until I whispered, "Who are you?" It smiled. "I'm the one who listens when God does not." I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The reflection didn't move this time. It stayed seated, smiling faintly, eyes filled with a dull red light. The church bells rang once, sharp, metallic, echoing like a scream. Then the mirror shattered, shards scattering across the floor like silver confetti. I looked down. Among the pieces, my reflection stared back. 100 versions of my face, each whispering the same phrase. "You've already confessed." I fled the church, heart pounding, and didn't return until dawn. But when I entered, the mirror was whole again, hanging neatly on the wall, unbroken. And written across its center, in letters that pulsed faintly beneath the surface. "Next time, listen harder." That night, I covered every mirror in the rectory with cloth. But the whispers didn't stop. Now they come from the dark glass of the confessional itself, where even without reflection, something still watches me, and waits for me to answer. Episode 6, The Bells at Midnight. They began ringing again long after midnight. 3 solemn chimes, then silence. Then 4 more. Then 7. I counted each one in the dark of my room, the sound crawling through the walls like breath through a grave. There was no wind that night, no reason for the bells to move, yet they did, slow, deliberate, as if each toll marked a name. I lit a candle and stepped into the hallway. The church loomed ahead of me, the air colder than it had ever been. As I walked closer, I heard something strange beneath the bells, a murmur, faint, like prayers whispered backward. The doors to the nave were open. The moonlight spilled across the pews, pooling around the confessional like milk around a wound. The bell rope swung gently in the tower's shaft, though no hand held it. I called out, "Who's there?" The bell stopped. Then from somewhere above, a voice, dry and hoarse, echoed through the rafters. "Count them, Father. Count your sins." I froze. My eyes lifted toward the belfry ladder. For the first time since I arrived, I climbed. Each step groaned like it had been waiting to bear my weight. The air smelled of smoke and rain and something metallic. When I reached the top, I saw them. The ropes weren't tied to the bells anymore. They were bound around objects, small dark bundles hanging from the beams. I leaned closer, stomach twisting. They were rosaries, dozens of them. Each crucifix was nailed through a small scrap of parchment. I plucked one free. On it, in smeared ink, a single word: lust. Another: greed. Another: envy. 7 ropes. 7 sins. 7 bells. The last parchment read simply: pride. As I held it, the bells thundered once more, so loud the tower shook. The ropes tightened like throats being strangled. I stumbled back as the sound grew unbearable, until something screamed from inside the largest bell. Not metal. Flesh. I fell down the ladder, slamming onto the wooden floor below. My candle went out. From above, the ropes unraveled and dropped, one by one, coiling like snakes at my feet. The smell of blood filled the air. Then came the whisper, from the confessional far below. "You've heard our names. Now speak yours." I ran. Down the stairs, through the nave, into the open air where the bells still echoed without moving. But the townspeople had heard them too. The next morning they came to the church in silence, eyes hollow, faces gray. One by one they knelt and began confessing, not to me but to the ground. Every confession ended with the same words. "The bells told me what I am." By nightfall they left offerings at the church door, coins, rosaries, torn letters, each marked with a single sin. And when I entered the confessional to pray, the voice from the other side whispered, almost tenderly, "You were the first bell, Father. You just never heard yourself ring." That night, the bells rang 7 times again. But I didn't count them, because the 7th toll was coming from inside the booth. Episode 7, The Nun Without a Shadow. The first time I saw her, I thought she was only a memory, one of those half-formed visions that appear when you've stared at candlelight too long. But she was there, standing in the aisle of St. Adeline's after dusk, her habit blacker than the shadows themselves, her veil perfectly still despite the restless wind that moved everything else. She bowed her head when she saw me. "Good evening, Father." Her voice was gentle, melodic, almost kind. I asked who she was. "Sister Agnes," she said. "I've come to serve again." The name caught something inside me. I had seen it before, etched on a brass plaque near the confessional, almost worn away by time. In memory of Sister Agnes Moreau, servant of St. Adeline's 1889 to 1912. But I said nothing. Loneliness had begun to twist the edges of my sanity. Perhaps I thought she was from a nearby convent, one the bishop had sent without notice. That night she stayed to clean the altar. I watched her from the doorway. Her movements were precise, reverent. Yet the light around her bent strangely, as if her body absorbed more than it reflected. Then I saw it. When she passed before the candlelight, there was no shadow. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the eye. The church's dimness, the flicker of flame. But every step she took confirmed it. The floor remained empty behind her. Later, as we shared a quiet supper in the rectory, she told me she had once served here before the church was closed. "Father Laurent and I tended the confessional," she said, her hands folded neatly. "He was a good man, until he listened too long." My fork froze midair. "Listen to what?" She smiled faintly. "To the ones who never stopped confessing." That night, I dreamt of her voice echoing inside the booth, whispering words I couldn't understand. When I awoke, the confessional curtain was moving and the smell of lilies, the scent that clung to Sister Agnes's robes, filled the room. The next morning she was gone. Her chair was empty, her cup untouched. I searched the church. Nothing. But when I knelt before the confessional, I saw footprints in the dust, small, delicate, leading into the penitent's side. I opened the door slowly. The seat was warm. On the wall hung a rosary, its chain broken, its beads blackened by time. And carved into the wood above it were the words, "Forgive him, for he heard me." That evening I visited the town's archives. The clerk, an old man with trembling hands, retrieved a yellowed ledger. "Sister Agnes Moreau," he said softly, "died inside the confessional during prayer. They found her heart turned to ash." I returned to St. Adeline's before sunset. As I stepped through the door, I saw her again, kneeling before the altar, her hands clasped. "Father," she whispered, not turning to face me, "you must bless me before I go." My voice trembled. "Go where, sister?" She lifted her head. Her eyes were hollow. Her lips burned faintly as if lit from within. "To finish what I began." and before I could move, she dissolved into air, her habit collapsing onto the floor like a shed skin. That night, I looked toward the altar. For the first time, I saw her shadow, burned into the stone, kneeling, praying. And I knew she hadn't left at all. Episode 8, The Priest's Secret. For weeks, I'd ignored the dreams. They came in flashes, blood on a white collar, a child's voice crying through thunder, a confessional door slowly closing from the inside. I told myself they were tricks of exhaustion, echoes of the horrors I'd seen in St. Adeline's. But deep down I knew better. The whispers inside the booth had changed. They no longer asked for forgiveness. They called me by name. Elias, they breathed whenever I passed the confessional at night. Do you remember? One evening, as rain lashed against the stained glass, I found myself standing before the booth again, drawn to it like a moth to its own funeral flame. Do you remember? The whisper came again from the penitent's side this time. I forced my voice steady. Remember what? Your sin. I froze. My hand tightened around the edge of the partition. There is nothing you can tell me, I said, that God doesn't already know. The voice chuckled, a low, broken sound almost human. Oh, Father. He knows. But you don't. And then the curtain on my side began to move. I stumbled back, but someone, sat inside the booth now, a faint outline in the flickering light. His head was bowed, his hands clasped tight in prayer. When I stepped closer, I felt my breath stop. It was me, or something wearing my face. It lifted its head and I saw tears, black like ink, running down its cheeks. You buried me, it said softly, in the garden behind the orphanage. The words hit me like a hammer. My knees weakened. I wanted to deny it, but memory is a cruel priest. It always demands its confession. Years ago, before St. Adeline's, I had been a teacher at a small parish orphanage. There was a boy there, quiet, gifted, but troubled. He said he heard voices from the walls, that the angels spoke through cracks in the wood. The church called him delusional. I called him possessed. One night, I locked him in the chapel alone to purge his demons. By dawn he was dead. His small hands bruised from pounding the door. His last words etched into the floor with a broken nail, Father, forgive yourself. I buried him behind the orphanage, beneath the oak tree. Told everyone he'd run away. Now, inside the confessional, the voice whispered, You called it mercy. I fell to my knees, clutching my collar, shaking. Please, I begged. If you are him, if you are that boy, tell me what to do. The air turned cold. The reflection in the lattice leaned closer, its eyes completely black. Confess, it said. But not to God. The booth shuddered. Blood seeped from the seams of the wood, dripping onto the floor between us. The smell was copper and guilt. And then, silence. When I opened the other door, it was empty again. Only a single object rested on the seat. A child's rosary broken, its cross snapped clean in two. That night, I dreamt of digging under the oak again, my hands red, the earth breathing. And when I awoke, there was soil beneath my fingernails. Episode 9, The Possession of Mercy. The first time I met her, she was kneeling before the altar, whispering prayers so softly they sounded like breathing. Her name was Mercy Langford, a young woman with trembling hands and eyes that never seemed to blink long enough. She told me she came from the next town over, that her mother had heard St. Adeline's church had reopened, that she'd been feeling heavy for years and wanted to confess. Her voice broke as she said it. Father, I've done things I can't even remember doing. When she entered the booth, the air changed. The candle between us burned lower, bending toward her side as though pulled by something unseen. I used to dream of faces, she began. People I'd never met. I'd wake up crying, saying words I didn't understand. And then, she hesitated. They started dying, Father. Those people. The same faces from my dreams. Her whisper cracked. I didn't know them, but they were real. Their names appeared in the paper. Their eyes, the same. I tried to calm her. It isn't your fault, my child. But she laughed. A hollow, broken laugh that didn't belong to her. That's what you said to them too, isn't it? I froze. What do you mean? I whispered. The ones who confessed before me, she said, her tone no longer her own. You told them it wasn't their fault. And yet they're still here. The booth's wooden walls began to creak, groaning like something alive. The candle went out. Mercy? I asked. No answer. Only the sound of breathing, too deep, too close. Then from her side, a voice. Not hers. Not human. Forgive me, Father, for their sins. The curtain burst open. Mercy's face was pale, her pupils wide as coins, her lips trembling as though she were trying to hold back a scream. Her hands clutched the lattice so tightly that her nails split and bled. "I hear them," she whispered. "All of them. The ones who came here. The ones who never left. They're inside me now." I stepped forward, reaching to steady her, but she recoiled, her body twisting violently. The light from the nave flared, casting a crimson glow across the booth. "Do you know what they want, Father?" she rasped, her voice deepening until it scraped like stone. "They want you." I grabbed the crucifix from the wall, pressing it against her forehead. "In the name of Christ, release this soul." Her head jerked back. Her scream rattled the glass windows, a sound like every voice I had ever heard in the confessional, merging into one endless cry. Then suddenly silence. Mercy collapsed. I caught her before she hit the floor. Her pulse was faint but steady. When her eyes fluttered open, they were clear again, soft, human. She looked at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's quiet now," she whispered. "Thank you." I exhaled, trembling with relief. "You're safe, my child." But as I helped her to her feet, she smiled weakly and said, "Father, why are you still whispering?" My mouth went dry. I hadn't spoken. From inside the confessional, a dozen voices murmured the same phrase together, echoing like wind through the bones of the church. "Thank you, Father, it's quiet now." And for the first time, I realized silence could be far more terrifying than screams. Episode 10, The Diary of Saint Adeline. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It fell in long, relentless sheets, blurring the graveyard into a sea of crooked crosses and nameless stones. The church smelled of damp stone and candle wax, heavy with the weight of unspoken things. That morning, a delivery arrived, an old chest sent from the diocese archives. The note said simply, "Recovered during restoration. Property of St. Adeline's." Inside, wrapped in rotting linen, was a book. Its cover was bound in dark leather, cracked and swollen from moisture. The title, barely legible, read, "The Diary of Father Matthew Devereux, First Confessor of St. Adeline's Parish." My pulse quickened. Father Devereux had been the church's founder, a man revered as a saint and feared as a mystic. They said he built St. Adeline's on land where witches were once executed. I carried the diary to my desk, lit a candle, and began to read. October 3, 1824. The confessional is complete. The wood hums when I touch it, as though remembering. They said I should not use it, not yet. But the voices behind the curtain have already begun to speak. October 6. It listens to those who have not come. It hears sins unspoken. It asks for nothing, only that I remain. October 11th. I have learned the truth. The wood came from the gallows. From the very beams where heretics begged for forgiveness. Their last breaths soaked into it, and now it prays back. The ink grew darker with each page, as if the words themselves had begun to bleed. October 15th. I thought it sought redemption. But it does not ask to forgive, it asks to remember. It traps their guilt, and in doing so, it feasts. My hands trembled. The candle flickered violently, casting red light across the wall. I turned another page. October 19th. I made a vow. One last confession, to seal it. I will give it my sin. My greatest sin. Then nothing. The rest of the book was blank, except for the final page. Carved into the leather itself, not written, were the words, "Forgive me, for I built God's prison." I closed the diary, my heart pounding. From somewhere deep inside the church, I heard the faint creak of wood, like footsteps moving across the altar. I grabbed the candle and stepped into the nave. The confessional loomed ahead, its door slightly open. Inside, something new had appeared, a small, square panel beneath the priest's seat. I knelt and pried it open. The compartment was lined with paper, hundreds of fragments, each scrawled with names, dates, and sins. Some were centuries old. Others looked fresh. One slip was written in handwriting I recognized, my own. It read, "Father Elias Moreau. October 19th. Built his prison again." My candle guttered out. In the dark, the whisper came, not from the booth this time, but from all around me. "He gave it his sin. What will you give it, Father?" And beneath the rising chorus of voices, I heard the faintest sound of pages turning, though the diary was still closed on the table behind me. Episode 11, The Shadow That Knelt. The first thing I noticed was the candle. It burned lower every night, no matter how long I stayed awake. And always, it flickered toward the confessional. By then, the whispers had quieted. Too quiet. The kind of silence that waits, that listens. I started recording my sermons on an old cassette machine, hoping to capture something. A sign, a voice, a tremor in the air that could prove I wasn't losing my mind. But what I captured was worse. On the tape, between my words, another voice breathed. Oh, measured, whispering responses. "Forgive me, Father." Then, faintly, my own voice answered, though I had not spoken. "Not yet." I played it again. And again. Each time the words grew clearer. It was a conversation, between me and something that sounded like me. That night, I left the recorder running inside the confessional. At midnight, the bells rang once, and the church filled with a soft scratching sound, like kneeling on stone. When I returned in the morning, the tape had run to the end. I rewound it with shaking hands. The first few minutes were static. Then a sound. A door opening. Footsteps. Breathing. Then the same low voice. "Father Elias Moreau, will you kneel?" And another voice, mine, unmistakably mine, answered, trembling. "Yes." My blood went cold. I stopped the tape and looked up. Across the nave, the confessional curtain was drawn. The morning light touched the floor before it, and there, clear as ink, was the outline of someone kneeling. A shadow. But there was no one casting it. I walked slowly toward it. My breath misted in the cold air. The closer I got, the more I felt the temperature drop, as if the stone itself exhaled frost. The shadow moved. It straightened, rising slowly like a body remembering how to stand. "Who are you?" I whispered. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. The first who listened. The last who prayed. "You called, Father." We only answered. The walls groaned. The candlelight dimmed until the church seemed to sink into its own darkness. I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. My own shadow stretched toward the booth, merging with the kneeling one. Then silence. When I awoke, it was morning again. I was lying before the altar, the recorder still in my hand. The tape had stopped. But carved into its plastic casing were words etched deep enough to bleed through. "You knelt." I stumbled to the confessional. The shadow was gone. Yet when I entered, the air felt crowded, thick with something unseen, something present. On the seat where the penitent should sit, lay my rosary, the one I'd lost weeks ago. But every bead was blackened, melted together as if by fire. That night I played the tape one last time. After the final whisper faded, there was a sound I hadn't heard before. A soft thud. A breath. And then my own voice saying quietly, "I'm listening now." The tape ended. But the whisper continued, from behind me, from the dark, patient booth. "Then kneel again." Episode 12, The Sin That Wasn't Mine. By the time the 12th confession came, I no longer trusted sound. The church echoed too easily. Words twisted when they crossed the nave, coming back distorted, heavier, as if carried by another tongue. It was late evening when he arrived, a man with hands like shovels and eyes that never met mine. His coat was soaked from the rain and mud clung to his boots like guilt. "I need to speak," he said, voice shaking. "I did something terrible." I led him to the confessional. He hesitated before stepping inside, as if the door itself resisted him. When he finally sat down, his breathing filled the booth, harsh and ragged. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I've taken a life." I felt a familiar chill trace my spine. The same words I'd heard weeks ago, from a voice that wasn't human. "Who did you kill, my son?" He swallowed hard. "A woman. I found her near the river. I don't know why I did it. I just did." His words came out in bursts, each one sharper, faster. "She was praying. She looked at me like she knew me. I didn't even..." He broke off, trembling. "Please, Father. Tell me I can be forgiven." I breathed slowly, searching for words. But before I could speak, the confessional creaked. The lattice between us began to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs. "Father," the man whispered, "is someone else in there?" I looked through the grid. His outline blurred, twisting slightly. The candlelight flickered, and for a moment I saw two figures sitting where he was. One sobbing, the other smiling. "Tell me your name," I said softly. He hesitated. "Aaron Wicks." The name hit me like a blade of ice. That name was already written in the parish death records, from 3 months ago. "You're mistaken," I said. "Aaron Wicks drowned in the river." The man's breathing stopped. Then slowly his voice shifted. "No, Father. She drowned. I was the one pulled from the water." My blood froze. The lattice between us pulsed once more, and the light in the booth dimmed to a dull crimson. He began to laugh, low, hollow, echoing through the wood. "You can't absolve me. I'm not here for that." "Then why are you here?" I whispered. The voice that answered was not his. "To remind you, Father, that confession doesn't cleanse the soul. It transfers it." I opened my door and rushed to the other side, but the seat was empty. Only water dripped onto the floorboards, forming a small puddle that smelled faintly of the river. When I touched it, the cold bit deep into my skin, so deep that for a moment I thought I felt another hand pressing back. Later, as I wiped the floor, I found something half buried between the cracks. A rosary, its cross bent and rusted. Around it was a slip of paper, scrawled in shaking letters. Forgive her. The sin was never mine. That night, I dreamed of the river again, its surface black and still. Something floated beneath it, whispering my name. When I woke, my hands were wet, and the confessional door was ajar, dripping slowly onto the stone below. Episode 13, The Fire Sermon. The smell of smoke woke me before dawn. At first, I thought it was only a dream, the remnants of nightmare curling through my sleep like incense. But when I opened my eyes, the air itself shimmered. A thin haze drifted above the pews, glowing orange in the first light of morning. I ran to the nave. The confessional was burning. Not with flame, not at first. The wood pulsed with heat, its edges glowing red, the grain itself smoldering like it had remembered an old fire and decided to relive it. The air around it hummed, a low, steady moan, like hundreds of voices breathing the same word over and over, Amen. I shouted for help, though I knew no one would come. The townspeople no longer entered the church after dark. Not since the bells, not since mercy. The fire spread slowly, deliberately, licking the floorboards, climbing the altar steps as if it knew its path. And in the middle of the blaze I heard it, the voice. Do you remember the boy? My heart seized. No, I said. Not again. The boy beneath the oak, it whispered. The boy who never stopped praying. The flames grew brighter, and within them faces began to take shape. The penitents, the lost, the condemned. I saw them all. The widow, the carpenter, the nun, the child with ash-colored feathers. Their mouths moved soundlessly until, one by one, they spoke in unison. Confess, Father. Burn what you built. I staggered backward, choking on smoke. The crucifix above the altar had begun to blacken, the eyes of Christ gleaming with molten tears. My cassock stuck to my skin, the heat pressed down like the weight of a hand. And then, amid the fire, I saw him, Father Laurent, the last priest of St. Adeline's before me. He was standing inside the confessional, untouched by the flames. His eyes were hollow, his lips moving as if still preaching to the damned. You opened it again, he said softly. You thought you could control it. What is it? I shouted. What have we done? He smiled, a brittle crack of light across his charred face. You called it a place of forgiveness. But this booth was never meant to cleanse. It collects. Every sin ever whispered here lives on in the wood. It feeds. The fire roared behind him, yet he didn't burn. And now, he said, it's full. A thunderous crack split the air. The walls of the church blazed to life, except for one place. The confessional stood at the center of the inferno, untouched, glowing like the heart of something alive. I fell to my knees, gasping prayers I didn't remember learning. Father Laurent, I cried. Tell me what to do. His voice came from everywhere now, the fire, the bells, the smoke itself. Preach, Elias. Preach the last sermon. I rose, trembling, and lifted my arms toward the flames. In the name of God, I shouted, let this house be purified. The fire surged, consuming the walls, devouring the roof, but the confessional remained, untouched, unyielding. And then, just before the ceiling collapsed, I heard it whisper through the roaring heat. God doesn't hear you anymore. When I awoke, I was lying outside in the ash, the church behind me burned to its bones. Everything was gone, except the confessional. It stood alone amid the ruins, blackened but unbroken, its door slightly open. Inside the seat was still warm. And carved freshly into the charred wood were 4 words. The sermon isn't over. Episode 14, The Inverted Cross. The ruins of St. Adeline still smoked 3 days after the fire. The stone walls stood like charred bones, but the confessional remained, blackened, silent, whole. It was the only thing untouched by the flames, as if the fire itself had bowed before it. I should have left. I should have fled that cursed ground and never looked back. But I didn't. Instead, I rebuilt around it. The bishop sent letters demanding reports, blessings, explanations. I sent none. I told myself I stayed to restore faith, to reclaim what was holy. But in truth, I stayed because I couldn't bear not knowing what it wanted next. On the 4th night, as I worked by lamplight, I saw it. The cross above the altar, the new one I had hung that morning, was upside down. At first, I thought it had fallen, that the nails had loosened from the weakened stone. But when I touched it, the wood was fixed tight, the iron cold. It hadn't slipped. It had turned. Then I heard the bells again. Only 3 this time, low and uneven, like breathing in a dream. The confessional door creaked open by itself. I called out, "Who's there?" A whisper answered, soft, deliberate. "You fixed the church, Father. But not yourself." The light in the nave dimmed, the lamps guttering one by one until only the altar remained illuminated. The air grew thick, not hot, but heavy, dense with a sweetness like rot. And then, from the confessional, came the sound of prayer. Familiar words, spoken in Latin, rolling out in a voice that mirrored mine exactly. I approached slowly, heart hammering. "Stop," I said. "In the name of Christ." The voice cut me off. "Christ?" It laughed. "You think his name still means anything here?" The curtain parted. Inside sat a man, a perfect image of me, head bowed, hands clasped around a rosary that bled from between his fingers. He lifted his head and I saw the mark on his forehead, an inverted cross carved deep into the flesh. "You wear the collar," he said, "but you pray to the same silence I do. Who are you?" I demanded. He smiled, my smile wrong and slow. "I am what remains when faith rots. I am what listens when God stops." The walls began to pulse with a low vibration, a hum that built until every crucifix in the church trembled. One by one the crosses turned upside down, all of them, even the small one around my neck. The other me rose from the booth. "It's time, Father," he whispered. "Time to confess what you believe in now." I backed away, clutching the bleeding rosary. "I believe in salvation." He stepped closer. "No. You hunger for it." The lamps burst. Darkness swallowed the room. I felt a cold hand grasp mine, my own hand, and press the rosary into my palm. The blood was warm. "Salvation burns," the voice said beside my ear. "But damnation remembers." When light returned, the confessional was empty. The crosses still hung inverted. And carved into the altar stone, where Christ's feet once rested, was a single sentence. "Your faith belongs to me now." That night I tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. My throat moved, but another voice spoke, deeper, slower, patient. And as I whispered amen, every cross in the church turned again, this time facing me. Episode 15, The Last Confession. The night I decided to end it, the moon hung low, red as blood, heavy as guilt. The air around St. Adeline's was still, the silence thick enough to taste. The confessional waited in the center of the ruins, its black wood gleaming faintly in the candlelight as though it knew. For days I'd avoided sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The faces of those who had confessed, twisted in agony or peace, I could no longer tell which. Their voices haunted me, 1,000 whispers in the same breath. But tonight I would finish it. I would confess. I lit the last remaining candle and stepped into the booth. The seat creaked under my weight, familiar now, almost welcoming. The curtain slid shut, sealing me in darkness. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned," I whispered. The words fell heavy, trembling. "Go on," a voice answered, my voice from the other side. "I have built your prison," I said. "I opened what should have stayed buried. I turned faith into hunger. I gave you my soul, piece by piece, with every confession I heard." Silence. Then a low breath, warm through the lattice. "You didn't give it," the voice said. "You fed it." The walls of the confessional began to pulse again, that old, dreadful rhythm. I felt it through the wood, the same heartbeat that had throbbed beneath the floor so long ago. "I don't want redemption," I said. "Only an ending." The voice laughed softly. "There are no endings, Father Elias. Only inheritance." The air thickened. I could feel the presence pressing closer from the other side, my mirror, my shadow, my sin. "Then take it," I said. "Take me." Pause. "Then, confess one more thing." My hands trembled. "There's nothing left." "Then confess your faith," it said. I swallowed hard. "My faith," I began, my voice shaking, "is that God stopped listening long ago." The candle flickered violently, then went out. The darkness inside the booth was complete. And then I felt it, cold fingers brushing my cheek, tracing the outline of the cross on my collar. "You finally told the truth," it whispered. "Now we are one." The wood beneath me split with a deep, cracking sound. The confessional seemed to inhale. I tried to stand, but the seat held me fast, as though the church itself had clenched shut around me. Voices filled the darkness, all of them, every sinner who had ever confessed here, whispering in unison. "Forgive us, Father, for you have sinned." The lattice glowed faintly red. My reflection appeared on the other side again, smiling. Then it leaned close and said, "This is not the last confession, Father. This is the first prayer." The door burst open. A rush of cold air flooded the church. When I stepped outside, or thought I did, the walls were gone, the night endless. The confessional stood alone in an ocean of black ash. The wind carried a single sound, bells tolling in reverse. I turned back once. The booth stood open, empty. Inside, the candle burned again, but it wasn't wax. It was flesh. And the flame whispered my name. Elias Moreau. The last priest of St. Adeline's. The first confessor of its new God.
Epilogue: The silence of St. Adeline. They say the church was never rebuilt, that nothing grows where its foundation once stood, not grass, not moss, not even weeds. Only black soil, soft as ash, that swallows the rain whole. The townspeople avoid the hill now. They say the wind-up there still smells of incense and smoke. And if you listen closely, you can hear the faint tolling of bells long since melted. No one remembers when they last rang, but everyone remembers why. Of Father Elias Moreau, nothing was ever found. Only his collar, charred and folded neatly on the altar stone. Some say he left in the night, unable to bear his faith. Others whisper that he never left at all, that he became the last confession he ever heard. When storms pass through the valley, travelers swear the mist takes the shape of a church, towering, broken, with a faint red light flickering from within. And sometimes, if the wind is just right, a voice follows. "Forgive me, Father." No one answers, because St. Adeline's no longer needs a priest. It only needs a listener. And somewhere, deep beneath the soil, the old confessional still stands. It's what, untouched by fire, its heart still beating, waiting for another sinner, for another whisper, for another faith to feed on. And when that whisper finally comes, soft, trembling, desperate, the door will open, slow and patient, with a voice that sounds almost kind. "Go on, my child. I'm listening."